I am so excited to introduce the keynote speaker, Dr. Ernest Morrell. Here's why I'm excited, is because he answers the question, what if every single teacher is a change maker and looks at teaching in a different way, focused always on the student? He is the Coyle Professor of Literacy Education and Director of the Center for Literacy Education at the University of Notre Dame. He was formerly the Macy Professor of English Education and Director of the Institute for Urban and Minority Education at Teachers College at Columbia University. He is also an elected member of the AERA Council, elected fellow of the American Educational Research Association, and a past president of the National Council of Teachers of English. Dr. Morrell was an award-winning high school English teacher in California. Where are my English teachers? Yeah. And he now works with teachers and schools across the country with this purpose and this passion to infuse multicultural literature, youth popular culture, and media production into standards-based literacy curricula in after-school programs. He is the author of nearly 100 articles and book chapters and 5 books, including Critical Media Pedagogy, Achievement, Production, and Justice in City Schools, and Linking Literacy and Popular Culture. And by the way, in his spare time, he also coaches youth sports and writes poems and plays. Please give the warmest Dallas ISD welcome to Dr. Ernest Morrell.
It's an absolute privilege to be here. The first thing I want to say to all the brand new teachers is thank you, thank you, thank you for what you have signed up to do. And I want you, even if you're not a new teacher, to turn to a new teacher, turn to the person next to you, say thank you for what you do for our children. Remember that, right? Remember that what you are doing, as Superintendent Ernest has said, what you do with a 5th grader, if you teach 5th grade or whatever you teach, 5th graders, I got a woo for 5th grade, will not only impact that child, you may impact her grandchildren, right? It's a huge, huge deal. All of us were reminiscing on our first day of teaching. For me, it was exactly 25 years ago that I was a first-year teacher sitting next to my mom in a room like this, and my mom was near her 30th year of teaching. Both my parents taught for 50 years each. My heart beating out of my chest. And the same things, and our speaker was the mayor of Oakland, California, where I'm from, but the same things he was saying, woo for Oakland, someone's from Oakland here? Stop it, stop it. Oh. The same things that he was saying to me 25 years ago are the things that continue to matter. What I was thinking about then was, am I up for it, right? I knew the kids were. And it's hard to follow the Skyline drill team and the Carter drum line, right? I had to take a video of that and show my kids, like, what are you guys doing this summer? But really, everything that we need to say, everything that all the adults can say has been said by those kids in their actions. And that is that kids are beautiful and that kids are brilliant and they're easy to believe in, and when you give them things to do that matter to them, and you say, you know what, go out and change the world as a 3rd grader, they change the world, right? So what I want to talk about today is 2 things, really, right? One is, and I should preface my remarks by saying, I firmly believe, and I believe the data show this, that we are on a long arc as a profession of education toward continual success. We have been successful in doing things that people would have thought not possible 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, or even 20 years ago. Schools get better. Kids get smarter. They can do more now than they ever could. But we have to ask ourselves 2 questions, I think, as educators. One, what are the challenges that we continue to face today? Right? How do we get better? Those who continue to get better always ask the question, how can I get better? And the second question is, what are great teachers doing today? Right? Even though we're improving, not everyone's improving at the same pace. So I want to deal with both of those. What are the challenges that we continue to face? And what are the best practices that are out there? So this is me, right? This is my family. I just wanted to show you that I have a family and that I am a professor at the University of Notre Dame. But I really want to start with the challenge that we face. And I think Dr. Flores and Dr. Hinojosa both kind of alluded to this. The challenge that we face is not who our young people are, but who they are perceived to be and how they come to perceive themselves. If I could write down the reason for 95% of the challenges that I have faced over the past quarter century with young people, it's because they do not believe in themselves, because they are taught by our society not to believe in themselves. And so when I think about what an education does, it's not just going to help a kid be better in STEM or learn more about history or be a better reader or writer. First and foremost, what education does is help a young person to radically love themselves so that they can radically love the world. We have young people, unfortunately, who are unloved by the very society that is supposed to wrap its arms around them. Those are the kids we teach. Those are the kids I've been working with my entire adult life. Trauma is real. The language of power is real. Your kindergartners, if they've turned on a TV, turned on an iPad, looked at a cell phone, looked at billboards, have already heard messages that say, you might not be good enough. And so when they put their heads down and when they say this is boring and I can't do this and this is stupid, and my first day of class, I kid you not, after I gave my speech, one of the kids raised their hands and said, are we ever going to do anything fun in class this year? Right? I still remember Mario. What they're saying most of the time, give me a reason to believe in myself. So I say 4 things about the trauma and the language of power. It exists. It causes trauma. Kids experience trauma, and they bring it to our classrooms, and they lay it kind of at our feet and say, do something about this. But most importantly, through teaching, it can be subverted. We can change that trajectory. The potential is there. The brilliance is there. But the belief and the self-love are not always there. And that's the most important thing that you will do through English or through social studies or through history or math or science or foreign language or physical education, whatever subject you teach. What you're really doing is putting a kid on a pathway toward freedom. Freedom from that trauma, freedom from that language of power, freedom to do whatever it is they want to do, whatever it is they can imagine, they can dream, right? 2 quotes that really shaped my philosophy as an educator. One comes from Frederick Douglass. He talks about being enslaved and how once he learned to read, he became free from that. He became free to imagine. Once you learn to read, you are forever free. And the second one comes from James Baldwin, right? The pronoun that we use, my mom would say our babies, right? Can't wait till the babies come. Our children, not the children, not those children, not their children, but these are all our children. And what do you want for your own children, if not the best, right? These are all our children. Cornel West says the 2 biggest problems in our community are too much poverty and too little self-love. Education intervenes in both of those, right? It's not just about changing a material trajectory, which it does. You know, my family story is very similar to the stories that people shared. If it weren't for teachers, my dad didn't even have shoes when he went to school. But the teachers allowed him to be, you know, a military hero and a basketball coach and a football coach and a high school teacher for 50 years because of those teachers that believed in him. So what do we do? Right? What do we do with these challenges? And I agree with everything that everyone said about Dallas ISD being a great place to start your teaching career. Wherever I go around the country, I talk about 2 things. I talk about what's happening in Texas, and I talk about what's happening in Dallas and Houston. These are the best models of urban education that exist in the country. Right here in your backyard, in the district that you're going to work in. Educators have power. Right? We have power to do several things, but most importantly, to change the trajectory of a child, a family, or a community. Many of you are sitting here because of the teachers you had. So you have to imagine yourself, even if it's going to be scary in those first couple weeks, I have real power to make a huge difference. That's not just a Pollyanna statement. It is absolute fact. You, outside of a kid's family, is the most powerful influence they will ever have. Is the teacher that is in front of them 185 days a year. Literacy and I mean literacy in terms of learning across the disciplines, is the foundation of a radical self-love and cultural transmission, as well as academic engagement. So this is the question, right? How do we inspire literate lives? How do I inspire these children, 5-year-olds to 17-year-olds, right? Understanding that inspiration is the key to engagement. Engagement is the foundation of motivation. Motivation leads to academic achievement and the change in identity. Everything we want to happen stems outside of that, right? I want to raise scores. I want my kids to be great in math. I want them to learn to love reading. I want them to be great actors. I want them to be great athletes, the people who feel well in their bodies. But it begins with inspiration. That's the question. How do I inspire them? Inspire comes from the Latin word, literally it means to breathe life into. How do I breathe life into these students? That makes them see themselves as literate beings wanting to change the world. So when I think about the challenges, right, it comes down to 3 questions that have really shaped my life and the places where I've seen the most success. And the first one is the question, how do we get students excited about learning? Right? I learned when I was a student about the tiger crouch position. Right? You tell a bunch of kindergartners to get in the tiger crouch position. What position are they going to get in? Let me see you get in the tiger crouch. Come on, the tiger crouch. Right? You're leaning forward. Right? Your back is off the back of your seat. Right? Your chin is forward. Your awareness has changed. We know from neuroscience that when you are in the tiger crouch position, your brain is in a different state of readiness. It's about teaching people into the tiger crouch. Think about all the high-stakes moments in your life, right? Whether you're a UT Austin fan or a Dallas Cowboys fan, or you're watching, the 7th season of Game of Thrones, and you're going to find out what happens to Jon Snow. See, some of you geek out on that. You're in the tiger crouch position. Getting kids to lean in is the biggest shift that they begin to make, and they are welcomed into the second part of their academic lives, the lives where they are intellectuals, where they are artists, where they are musicians, where they are actors, where they're historians. We have to get them into that tiger crouch position. We have got to get them excited. The second question is, how do we develop their identity so that they believe in themselves, right? The I believe in you, right? That Dr. Flores had you say, I believe in you. That's a huge shift. How do we change their identities? And it's not just about what you say. Identity is actually about what you give kids the opportunity to do, right? Giving kids an opportunity to get on stage and lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance, or to be a part of a drum line, right? Or to be a part of a drill team, or to have their science experiments shown off to the entire school or the entire city. What are we giving kids the opportunity to do that changes their identity, says, you know what? It's not about what they say, it's actually about what I am becoming. And how do we make it culturally, socially, and digitally relevant? Like, relevancy is very important. There's not a kid left in our school system that was born in the 20th century. Right? Think about it that way. The class of 2019 was born in the year 2001. The kindergartners that are coming into your class are born in the year 2012. Right? I think, when did I buy these shoes? Right? I actually think my shoes are older than the kindergartners. Here's a factoid. The kindergartners who start in the fall, on average, will live to the 22nd century. They will work almost until the end of the 21st century. So what kind of education do they need in August 2018? It's got to be relevant for them, right? The things that matter to us don't matter to them, and they shouldn't, because it's an entirely different world. So what are some of the principles behind this work? Powerful teaching. The first thing we have to understand, 2 principles based on solid academic research. One is that all kids want to succeed. Right? Let's repeat that. All kids want to succeed. It is absolutely empirically true. If you want, I can give you a bunch of studies, but it's true. They all have high aspirations for themselves. And the second research presumption is that all kids can succeed. All kids can succeed. Now, here's the question. Do they? Do all kids succeed? The answer is obviously no, and that's why you're here in this profession. So the question we ask when we get it right, and I believe Dallas is getting it right, is why do the kids who want to succeed and can succeed still fail? That's the question of the ages. If they want to and they can, why do they fail? And then we begin to come up with better answers for ourselves, because the two most common answers out there are they don't want to and they can't. You have got to remove those answers from your entire existence. They do want to and they can, but they fail. And we have to figure out the reasons why. These are what I have found in my own experience to be the top 5 reasons. Number 1, they lose confidence. Think about that beautiful boy that I had on the picture, How Do We Inspire Literate Lives? The very first time he reads out loud in his first grade class, someone laughs. 10 hours later at night, his mom is trying to get him involved in a read aloud. He's like, I hate reading. So then he doesn't read. And he gets worse at it. And then there's more laughter. And there's more distance. Kids begin to lose confidence, and then they begin to engage in these self-defeating behaviors. We have to keep kids' confidence high. So I believe in you is not just a mantra. It is absolutely essential. They don't perceive what they're doing as relevant to them. Right? Everything that's happening to them in the world that matters, if it's outside the classroom doors, they won't perceive what's happening in the classroom as relevant to them at all. How does this help me in my life, today or tomorrow, is a question that they should legitimately ask of us. Number 3, lack of engagement with high-quality, relevant literature. Think of all the wonderful human tapestry of diversity that exists in the world. How much of that is making its way into our classrooms? Like, one of the questions I ask is, what do our classrooms say about our cultural values? And what if you never see yourself in the curriculum? You never see yourself on a wall. So the kids begin to distance. Engagement with a community of learners, right? Isolating the kids that we see are struggling, and lack of engagement with the social world. You turn these reasons around for failure, they become a recipe for success. Increase kids' confidence. Make sure they perceive it as relevant. Make sure we have the most high quality and relevant literature in whatever discipline we're teaching. Let the kids work together. And ask them this question: how do you want to change the world this year? Because that's exactly what we're going to do. We'll learn a lot of stuff along the way, but at the end of the year, my exit ticket for you is, how do we change the world in this biology class? What do we do? How do we make a difference? The second set of principles really begins with understanding the key to disengagement is a lack of a sense of belonging, that you don't matter. Right? So social and emotional learning, which is a huge shift. When kids have social and emotional intelligence, they do better in school, they don't misbehave, they show up for class, attendance goes way up, homework goes way up, violence goes way down. And the 2 key pillars to that are, is there a place for me? Do I see myself as belonging, and do my ideas matter? Right? Making sure that every kid has a place for themselves in the classroom where they can see themselves existentially. I matter here, and my ideas matter. Trust me, if this happens, if there's a sense of belonging, then you begin to move down this list. Then I can exert kindness and friendship. Then I have confidence, then I have courage, then I have hope I can change the world. But the pillar of that is, do I belong and do my ideas matter? Right? You build on that. The third set of principles is, classrooms in the 21st century have to be places where kids are talking as much as the teachers. So what are the questions that I'm asking? Where am I stepping back and allowing for students to speak? And begin to quantify that. How much did the students speak today? How much did each student speak in small groups and large groups? And is my class a polyvocal space where kids and adults are speaking to one another with human dignity? The big tenet right behind this work, this powerful teaching, what I've been trying to do for the past 25 years, students are rereading the world. They're not just responding and reacting, they're actually transforming the world. They're engaged in real activity. What real activities can I get kids doing this year to get them out of the classroom, into the community, into the hallways with video cameras, blogging, social media, projects like writing congresspeople, writing mayors and city hall members. How do I help them to feel powerful? And then they understand this is not just something that's going to help me do better on a test. It's actually changing the way that I interact with the world. That's a much bigger incentive than I'm going to give you an A- if you hand this in on Friday. Yes, you have to give grades, but grades do not motivate kids, right? Understand that. Grades motivate adults. Kids are not motivated by grades. They're motivated by impact, right? How can you make an impact? And love. How do we help kids to love themselves and love one another? So now I want to talk with the rest of the time I have about some practices, right? A literacy framework, and I use literacy broadly, but it's important about kids being readers and writers of the world. That transcends the disciplines, right? This is as relevant to science and math and foreign language as it is to social studies and English, right? Owning the world, owning the narrative, and producing knowledge for social change. And it's as relevant for kindergartners and first graders as it is for juniors and seniors. How can I produce knowledge? How can I share my brilliance? How can I have adults listen to me and understand that I have good ideas, right? And these ideas may make an impact now. So the first part of that is rereading the world. We have to ask ourselves in every single discipline, what am I reading? How are we reading the text that we read? And what are we doing? What kind of activities are we doing around that reading? I won't talk a lot about this lit will, but I will say that the basis from reading research for how kids improve their academic achievement is that they find joy and engagement in what they read. What happens after that is then they begin to develop the focus and stamina because they're reading, because they want to get to the next page, because there's actually something on that next page that appeals to them. Then they get the fluency and their reading achievement increases. But the base of that is, are kids reading text in your classroom that they choose to read and that they find enjoyable and that connect to the problems and the questions that they're asking? So when you do that, as opposed to presuming that I know what the kids need, asking them, what do you need? What do you want to do? Here's a challenge, right, for the entire district and for you in your classroom. Right? What this slide behind me says is that the magic number for improving achievement is having a kid read for 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes, right? It's not like doing push-ups, upside down or, backflips outside. And 10 minutes is all we need. The average child who identifies herself as a struggling reader reads for 2 minutes a night. Can you find material that challenges and stimulates kids to get them to read for 10 minutes a night? Basically, this is 30 years of research, and essentially what it's saying is if you take a kid who's averaging 1.8 minutes a night in the 30th percentile, they read for an additional 10 minutes, they're reading on par with someone who's in the 70th percentile. The magic number is 20 minutes. If we stimulate minds for kids to read for 10 minutes a day inside a class and 10 minutes a day at home, it will absolutely transform achievement in your classrooms and the entire district. 20 minutes. What do we have to put in their hands? And what do we have to challenge them to have this happen, right? And I've seen it. We have to have different readings. We have to read different things. In our math classes, in our science classes, in our history classes, in the geography classes, we have to read different kinds of text. And we have to read them differently, right? And this is where I focus. And some people say, well, literacy doesn't have that much to do with social studies, or literacy doesn't have a lot to do with biology. You better believe it does, right? Because they're reading, right? The texts have to be multicultural. They have to be engaging. They have to ask big questions. We have to have libraries of science texts and math texts that reflect the gender diversity and the ethnic and cultural and linguistic diversity of our classroom and our community and our city, if the kids are going to see themselves as becoming scientists or mathematicians or playwrights, right? We think about like the population of the world and where it's changing. The United States has less than 4% of the world's population and is shrinking, right? Africa and the Americas are where there's the biggest growth, and in Asia. And so the world of ideas is very, very different. So if we have a classroom that's 100% Eurocentric, what are we saying about the larger world of ideas? Right? How do we get them into the text? There are 3 ways that we talk about powerful reading, right? And you can think about this with whatever age group you're teaching, right? And these are some of the questions, and I work with teachers. The first is, we need to read behind the text. Students need to ask questions. Who wrote this text? Why did they write it? What was going on at the time? right? What biases does this author have, right? What are his or her blind spots? What were they not thinking of? We need to understand who's writing everything that we read, whether it's a newspaper article or a novel or a scientific experimental write-up. Who's the author? Every author has a blind spot. Every author has a bias. Every author has a history and a culture. And they write from that. That's where the trauma comes from, and we don't embrace that. And we think that everyone that's writing is objective and all they're writing is truth. That's harmful to our kids. And then they push back by saying, I don't want to read this because it's harmful to me. But they don't necessarily say it that way. What do they say? Oh, this is stupid. This is boring. Or why do we have to read it? But they're asking a legitimate question. Read behind the text. The second kind of reading we do, right? The reading within the text, the four kind of corners of the page. What's happening in the text? What are the arguments? What's the strength of those arguments? We really want students to kind of drill down and be very close readers of text. You have to become a close reader of the text if you're going to be an author of your own ideas. We read the past so that we can write the future. Kids are readers of the past and present only to the extent that they get to be authors of the future. But you have to get inside of a text as a reader if you want to be a kind of writer. Every great writer is a great reader of the text that he or she writes. This third kind of reading is the one that is the most absent in low-performing classrooms. When do we let students speak the truth to power? When do they get to push back on the text that they're reading and say, you know what, I find this offensive. I think this is sexist. I don't think that they made a great argument. I don't think that we should be reading this. I think that other people have had better ideas. I have better ideas. Reading in front of the text is the huge difference between those that are passive recipients and those that are actually transformers, right? So think about, how do we get out in front of the text that we read? Angela Davis asked it this way: what makes a reading of a text more thoughtful, more nuanced, more critical, or more complex? What makes a reading of a text more radical, right? And we ask students that question. What does it mean for you to get better at this, to ask better questions of the text you read? Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says, there's a danger of a single story. We want our students to get beyond the simple story and ask the complex questions. Make the arguments that are so complex, right, that you don't make the simple arguments that don't even need to be made. How do you bring more counter evidence to your own arguments? These are the kinds of things that make kids stronger readers and writers and help them create ideas. It also stimulates them. It gets them to that 20 minutes a night. It makes them want to come to class because they know their ideas are going to be questioned. They're going to argue whether they're 6 years old or 16 years old. These are the things that really make a difference. These are just some examples, right? Rereading the canon, right? You're teaching a popular text, a canonical text, but it doesn't reflect the demographics of your community or the classroom. Can students read against that? Can they read inside of it and say, we love Shakespeare, but these are some of Shakespeare's blind spots, right? We need to have other literature from diverse cultures. Having them get inside of the popular culture that they're reading or listening to or watching, right? Has anyone seen Aladdin, the movie? Right, the generation? So, in the very first 3 minutes, there's so much anti-Islamic dogma. Right, I showed it to my college students. I said, you were raised on this. Like, you were raised on this. That's not to rail against Disney, but what are the kids watching today that's inculcating them with values that are harmful to humanity? So we asked them, be a smarter reader, right? Of course you're going to think a certain way about the Middle East after you've been raised on movies like Aladdin. It doesn't mean that it's true, but it does mean these are the ideas you have. So we have elementary students doing post-colonial readings of The Lion King. I want you to talk about what are the stereotypes of Africa in this movie, right? Do you agree with them? What other information can we look at that might give us a more accurate picture of this entire continent of 2 billion people, right? Allow them to ask the question. Allow them to read in front of the text or speak back. Best practices, promoting critical inquiry, right? Reading upon, within, and in front of the text. Having students read independently at home, right? Having multicultural libraries across the disciplines in your classroom. Having families come in for family literacy nights. How many schools do family literacy nights? Right? That's another challenge. 3 to 4 times a year, whether it's high school, middle school, elementary school, bringing families in and saying, these are our ideas about reading and writing in the world. These are our ideas about literacy. This is how you can help us. This is how you can encourage your child to read at home and ask them critical questions. This is how we can work together to actually improve this child's reading life. This is how you do independent reading at home. This is how you do a read aloud. And you take a pledge, right? I will hold this up for a minute because this is the pledge that we have parents take, right, to get involved. 10 minutes of independent reading each night. We'll turn off technology, a book in hand or an article. The kids are reading 10 minutes a night at home. You do half the work for us. 10 minutes of child-centered discussion where you're asking them questions and listening to their ideas. Again, we talked about like knowing my ideas matter is the core to social and emotional intelligence. 30 minutes of reading each day during the summer, where kids lose most of their academic gain is during the summertime. You spend 1,000 hours during the summer of waking hours, 1,000 hours during the academic year in class. You spend as much time out of the class during the summer as your entire time in the class during the academic year. So what are we doing during the summer? Being a reading role model, creating a home environment where reading is cherished, and participating in these family literacy nights. The second practice that is really an important practice for the 21st century is talk in the classroom. How many of you were in an elementary class where the teacher did 90+% of the talking? Right? That's the norm for most of us, right? You listened. You may have said, 2 words an entire class day, 1776, the square root of 4. And then you were done, right? And then blah, 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 it went on. The ratio in our classes is much more 50-50, or even 1/3 and 2/3 them. So it's an entirely different shift to get kids talking in the classroom, right? Why is it important? We spend 70-80% of our waking hours in some kind of communication. 70-80% of that communication is talking. Speaking and listening are the 2 most important literacy skills and the 2 that are least taught. But that's how we build a classroom community. That's how we increase engagement. When kids know that they can speak and they can add ideas, they're more engaged. We started this curriculum maybe 15 years ago in a school in California, highly impoverished school district. Those kids began to outperform the state averages, and they continue to do so. But what we noticed in the second year, we had 0 expulsions. We weren't looking for the discipline data. But what the kids said is once we started talking, we built a community in the classroom. That community carries forward outside of the classroom. Of course, now we have restorative practices and a lot you'll read about, but that was news for us then. When kids are speaking together in the classroom, you have less bullying that takes place in the school, and less cyberbullying as well. So kids feel like they're more part of the community. Of course, they're developing their speaking and listening skills and improving confidence. 4 kinds of classroom talk that you should work on. The most important is the whole class discussion. Teacher leads that discussion, but the students are involved. You're eliciting comments, you're asking questions, the 1st grade version of that, or the 8th grade version of that. Students are leaning in because they know they can be called on at any moment, or they might have an idea. They're learning how to listen to their classmates. You're modeling all sorts of things. How do we synthesize ideas? How do we disagree? How do we learn that really smart people can have different opinions about things, right? The biggest difference that I see in the post-secondary at Notre Dame, where I teach now, and at Columbia, where I could tell where students were coming from in terms of their district, was not their reading and writing, but their speaking and listening. Students who had no experience speaking and listening cannot be successful in post-secondary education or the world of work. So if they're mute in class, they may get high test scores, but they don't know how to engage in a real conversation. So the whole class discussion is where that happens. How do you learn how to do this? How do you have someone come in your class and watch you and say, watch me for 10-15 minutes in this whole class discussion? How many students are participating? Are they listening? Are they building upon each other's ideas? Am I being a good devil's advocate? Am I asking good follow-up questions? The second and the biggest variable in terms of high-achieving classes and low-achieving classes is how much time kids spend in small groups, right? How do we get them working with each other outside of the teacher, where it's a student-centered, student-led classroom space, where they can share ideas with one another and the teacher doesn't have to lead that. Small groups lead to far more discussion time and students learning from one another, and so it's one of the big differences in terms of classrooms where there's high achievement. 25 to 33% of the time is spent in some kind of small group activity. So you have to ask yourself, how am I going to teach the students how to get into small groups? How am I going to make sure that those environments are are friendly and cooperative, and students know how to listen to each other and build on each other's ideas. Some kind of trials or debate. Helping kids learn how to argue orally helps their written arguments across the disciplines. And the final one is like giving kids an opportunity to get on stage and present, just like you saw the kids today, right? It could be a 2-minute book talk. It could be explaining something about a scientific experiment that you just did. It could be sharing something that happened over the weekend. If you do not have kids up in front of the classroom sharing their ideas, how can they learn to have the power of their voice, right? So some kind of student presentation, whole class discussion, small group discussion, formal debate, and student presentation. So we need to have mock trials and debates. We need to help students develop their listening skills. We need to develop social action clubs where an idea that comes up in classroom, we're actually going to do something about this after this unit is over. We're not just going to let it go, right? We're going to make a change. And having parents involved in this as well. One of the things that we face in this particular generation is that our kids are overrun by the media. So one of the ways that we want them to be very critical and vocal is of the media that they're watching and the media they're listening to. The American Medical Association says that the media are actually an addictive environment for young people, and they can trace mental illness, anorexia, bulimia, depression, violence, and anxiety to young people's engagement with the media. So literally, our young people are dying over their inability to read these images. Right? In my first couple of years of schooling, I will not ever forget this. I buried a student every year that I taught. And one of the reasons for that were messages that were sent via the media about what they felt they needed to do in order to accrue status. And so we began to take this on directly, right? Ask kids questions about, what are you watching? What are you listening to? What are the ideas that are out there? What do they say about you? What do they say about us as a community? What do they say about a particular gender or a racial group or an ethnic group or a region? Do you believe these things, right? What questions should you ask with your 6-year-old eyes when you're reading a cell phone or a tablet or watching the news, or 11-year-old or 16-year-old? How do we account for this, right, in the media? Right? These images from the 50s continue to shape the way we think about gender in our society. So when you talk about the difference in terms of aspirations for science or math between girls and boys, these images are informing how kids are thinking about their own identity. So we take this on, right? What are the assumptions made about who works and who's passive? Right? Who's in charge? Right? It's a commercial about beer, but it's really a commercial about power and gender. Or what about this one? How many images like this are your students going to see in this academic year? Thousands, tens of thousands. And they're forming their attitudes about a racial identity. Or these images about young people, what it means to be beautiful. 17 magazine, which is read by 11, 12, 13-year-old kids. The most common word on a 17 magazine cover, what do you think it is? Body, people sexy. Pretty, sexy, and body, in that order. Something about being the object of a man's desire or a boy's desire. What's on that 17 magazine cover that says anything about being intelligent? Nothing. Or strong. So then we know that, 5th grade girls are starving themselves for a 24-hour period or more because they're concerned about their body image. 5th grade girls. Or how many of our young boys are out there destroying themselves and each other over this image? People read the news about Chicago this weekend. I came from Chicago. 72 boys were shot over the weekend in Chicago. 13 died. This last weekend. Right? There are a lot of other factors involved, but how much of this is attributable to kids' inability to critically read these media? Right? So we have to talk to kids about what they watch and what they listen to. Teach visual literacy. Encourage parents to pay attention. And talk about proper behavior on the internet. Okay. The last thing I want to share is about writing, right? Our kids becoming powerful writers as a way for them to begin to tell their own story, right? Reading is breathing in, writing is breathing out. As I said, we are readers of the past and present, but what we really want our kids to be is authors of the future. And that happens through writing. whether it's writing up a word problem for math or writing up a science experiment or doing your own historical research, doing oral histories in your neighborhood, writing a poem or a play or an essay or argument. Writing, right? That's the difference maker in our generation. Kids can't just be receivers of knowledge, they have to be producers. We produce through our writing, right? Writing is not just impressive sentence structure, it's compiling words which can pierce the heart of the reader or listener, right? So we have to help our kids to become writers. How will you challenge them in your classrooms to create knowledge? How will you celebrate that knowledge? How will you share it? How will it have a larger audience than just a teacher, right? How can you turn those words out toward the community, out toward the larger society, out toward your larger school, out toward other kids in the classroom, right? Having kids understand the importance of audience, the importance of voice, you need to have an authentic audience and you need to develop authentic voices. This is the difference maker. If I'm just writing something for the teacher, why do I have to entertain the teacher? But if I'm actually writing something that I'm going to share with 500 kids, or the neighborhood, or all the parents are coming in, and I've seen this in my own practice, when you tell them this matters because someone's going to see it, you don't have to talk about revision. You don't have to talk about rhetoric. They want to know, like, is it good, right? What can I do to make it better? Because someone's going to be listening to me, right? That's a huge difference. Here's a project in the science realm. A colleague of mine, Chris Emden, maybe you've heard of him. He was the associate director of the institute I directed in Columbia. He developed a Science Genius project where kids are looking at scientific issues in their community that needed addressing. They would do scientific research, and then they would share the research via hip-hop. So instead of a science report, like, this doesn't look anything like the science fairs that I had when I was in middle school and high school. But this is a 21st century science fair. And so the judges in Science Genius are Jizza from the Wu-Tang Clan and an Ivy League science professor. It's like you get an 8.5 for your bars, but your research is on point. You get a 9.5 for that, right? And at the end of the Science Genius with these, middle school, elementary, and high school, you don't know if you want to give them a recording contract or a scholarship to Yale or both. But what's happening is the kids are getting excited about science. And their science achievement is increasing, and their interest in science is increasing. You don't have to get those kids in the Tiger Crouch and Science Genius because they love the hip-hop and they love the science, right? And so they have these science rap battles, bringing attention to transforming teaching and learning science, right? They fill arenas 3 times this size with people from all over the boroughs in New York. You don't have to tell a kid that, like, science matters when you're spitting bars about quirks that, 5,000 people go, ooh, in the room. And we work with these kids. We have to kick them out of the office during the summer because they want to stay and they want to keep working, right? There's some kind of inspiration in all of our disciplines at every age group where we'd have to kick the kids out of the classroom because they want to keep working. And that's the point. Writing about their own lives, a day in my life, is how we start every year in our classroom. Write about a day in your life. We take them through prompts. What do you see in the morning? What happens in the afternoon? We can arrange it for different disciplines if you want to do it from a scientific perspective or an English language arts perspective or a social science. We allow them to digitize it and add pictures and music and their own soundtrack, and they get to perform it and share it. And we talk about, what do you see in your everyday life that you're proud of? What do you see that you want to change? And how can we do something in class this year that might help you change those aspects of your daily life that you want to change? You have a captive audience for the next 9 months because they know we're going to do something about it. One of my classes, I taught for years. I had 5 gentlemen in my class as a condition of their parole because the parole officer knew if they were in my class, they would not have to be in juvenile hall. They did this assignment, and they were in tears about the things that were happening in their community. All 4 of those gentlemen are college graduates, right? They finished high school. They went on. I know them now. They're in their 20s. And it's like, we just have to ask them, what gets you fired up? Like, what are you upset about? Like, don't push anger out of the classroom. I want to know what the students are angry about because they're angry about something or excited about something, right? I'd rather deal with anger than sadness any day in the classroom. So let them become fired up. But you have to honor the promise that we're going to do something about this, right? We're going to do something about this as part of our work together as a class. So students are producing everything from critical memoirs to social movements, One of my classes ended with civil disobedience in John McCain's office and conversations about the DREAM Act in 2008. It started as a project in the class, and the student said, I want to start a social movement. And they ended up in the senator's office, right, and having legislation argued. Kids, right, because we asked the question, what is it that you want to do? What gets you fired up? Student research and social action projects, these two questions. If you could change the world, what's one thing you would do? If you could change your community, what's one thing you would change? And we take them through this process. Understand, I won't talk about the entire process, but moving from step 1 to step 2 is a revolution. From just talking about a problem to asking a question, even if the question is, what can we do about this? Or who's done anything about this? Or where can we learn more about this? So students bring problems, we turn problems into questions, we turn questions into projects that become actions. You can learn any discipline this way. You can learn any academic skill this way. You can learn foreign languages this way. You can learn about science this way. You can learn about mathematics this way. You can learn about history or geography or economics or politics and government. You can learn about literature by asking questions and creating projects. So these are a few, like with historians. So in Harlem, which is where I was most recently from, we took middle school students and high school students and had them become historians of the neighborhoods in Harlem. They began interviewing, they began archiving, collecting oral histories. Again, we started with a school that was rated D out of A through F in Harlem with 9th grade boys that were in danger of dropping out. 4 years later, all of the people involved in the project graduated from high school and enrolled in college next year. Now, that's not the only data point that matters to me, but it certainly matters to the families. 15 years, from 1999 to 2011, and from 2011 to 2016, we had 100% high school graduation, 100% college going rate of all the students that are involved in these projects. And we follow them longitudinally. And the thing is, we're just getting them excited about being producers of knowledge. This is another project we have, Ciphers for Justice, where kids are using digital literacies and spoken word poetry to investigate issues in their communities. Kind of like the Science Genius, but it's more on an English language arts bent. Youth research and academic production, conference presentations, policy briefs, plays, performances, documentaries, spoken word poems, hip-hop songs, research articles, you name it, right? Production is the difference. Ask yourself the question as you think about what you're going to do this year, what are my students going to produce that they want to tell their grandchildren about? That they're so excited about it that they will remember this when they're grandparents. You wouldn't believe what we did in our 2nd grade class when we marched to City Hall and demanded more playground spaces in our neighborhood or community, right? A 60-year-old telling her 2nd grade grandchildren about that story. You can make that happen, right? You can make that happen. So what's the promise? Healing, resiliency, elevating students above the trauma and the language of power, college access, radical self-love, literacy, cultural competence, academic achievement. It's funner to teach. Safer campuses and social action. So Toni Morrison said, if there's a book that you want to read but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. 2018, right? My parents have ended a collective century of teaching. You're just beginning. What kind of book do you want to write in your time at Dallas or your time in the profession? What do you want to change? What do you want to make possible that people now believe is impossible? Because everything that we think is impossible becomes possible when people imagine it. You have to believe that. What do you want to make possible as a generation of educators? What's that book that you want to write? And yes, September is just going to be the first chapter in that, or even the first paragraph of the first chapter. But you will write a book. Because as I said, we're on this long march toward excellence, and you are part of it. My mom and dad, as I said, taught for 50 years each. My mom and I taught in the same district. My dad taught in a different district. And this is what I learned from them. They were both award-winning teachers. My mom would always say, don't ever let anyone take away the privilege of teaching. And she would say, I can't wait until the babies come. We'd be in a meeting like this, and I'd be in the tiger crouch, and she'd be, doing her lesson plan, saying, I can't wait until this thing ends. I can't wait until this Dr. Morrell just shuts up so we can go to lunch. That was kind of my mom. And I was like, Mom, Dr. Morrell might actually have something to say. But what we could agree on is, I can't wait until the babies come. And for her, babies meant children of any age. Because when you have them, as Superintendent Hinojosa was saying, they are your children. I have 3 children now that are in school age. My kids' teachers are co-parents. And no matter what the media says, no matter what anyone says, you can't let that take away the privilege of having someone else's baby for 1,000 hours, which is how long you get them. Think about this. It's not just an American tradition. It's an international tradition. Take first graders or kindergartners the very first day of school. You have this 5 or 6-year-old. Parents bring them to your doorstep, whatever school you're at, right? Hand them to complete strangers, and then what do? What do? They walk away. Think about the awesomeness of that responsibility. They love these kids more than air. My youngest son is a kindergartner, rising first grader now. I hand them to you as an educator, and I walk away. And my wife and I go to work and do the things we do because we know that you will love them. It is a privilege to teach them. It is an absolute gift that you have to have that kind of influence in a kid's life, right? Raise your hand if you can remember your kindergarten teacher. Look around the room. You can't even remember all your family members' names. But you remember your teachers. Why? Because they matter, and it is a privilege. My father, as I said, was a high school teacher and a football coach. I told him I was going to be a teacher. I wanted to be. It was my senior year of college. He looked at me straight-facing, a 4-word sentence that I'll never forget. It actually happens to be on a poster that Pearson has in the back. And he said, "Son, teaching makes you eternal." And that was all he said. Not, do you see how we're living? Are you sure you want to get into this? Or nothing, right? He said, teaching makes you eternal. I was in the same district as my father, and I knew his reputation. And now, my father's at the very end of his life, unfortunately, from illness. But if you go on his Facebook page, or anytime I go in California and I talk, people come up to me, like in tears after. It's like, I had your father, right? I had your father. Even though he is not long for this world, his impact is because of the kind of teacher that he was. And you have to believe that. Somewhere down the road in 2050, there'll be someone in a room who's a teacher because of you. And they'll raise their hand like, I remember Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so because they loved me and they taught me. And much of what is possible now in my life is possible because they were in it. That's the kind of impact you're going to have. That's the kind of impact Dallas is having. And I'll just end with this, right? I've never encountered any children in any group who are not geniuses. And there's no mystery in how to teach them. The first thing you do is treat them like human beings. And the second thing you do is love them. I want to thank Dallas ISD and Pearson for having me here. It's been an absolute pleasure. But I want to just end by where I began, by thanking you, as Michael said, for making the best professional decision you could make and entering into what I think is unarguably the greatest profession in the world. Thank you for what you do.